Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday. Today is December 19th. Today is day 440 since October 7th of last year. This is a weekly summary that I do every Thursday. I've done it live, or other staff from Churches for Middle East Peace have done it live every week. We're taking off between now and the end of the year from live updates, but we'll continue to do Thursday summaries of the weekly news. Let us know if this is valuable to you and if you would like to still have live briefings in the new year. But today's video will be a little longer because it's a summary of what's happened in the last week. I'll start with some things that have happened just in the last day. Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières, I didn't write down the French, just published a report on Gaza in which they decided to escalate their language. They said in the north of the Strip, recent military offensives have made it clear that there's an illustration of the brutal war the Israeli forces are waging on Gaza. They said, we are witnessing clear signs of ethnic cleansing as Palestinian life is being wiped off of the area. Our firsthand observations of the medical and humanitarian catastrophe inflicted on Gaza are consistent with the descriptions provided by an increasing number of legal experts and organizations concluding that genocide is taking place in Gaza. Again, this is Doctors Without Borders. While we don't have the legal authority to establish intentionality, the signs of ethnic cleansing and ongoing devastation, including mass killings, severe physical and mental health injuries, forced displacement, and impossible conditions of life for Palestinians under siege and bombardment are undeniable. And friends, I think that is a summary that we just can't deny. Groups that are on the ground, that are witnessing what are happening, are documenting mass killings, severe physical, mental health injuries, forced displacement, conditions under siege and bombardment, and it is undeniable. Human Rights Watch also released a report today accusing Israel of committing a crime against humanity, of extermination, and an act of genocide by intentionally depriving civilians in Gaza of water access. There are videos of Israeli soldiers blowing up pumps, blowing up water supplies. That's just one example. In a post on X, Israel's foreign ministry said, the truth is the complete opposite of the lies of Human Rights Watch. Israeli strikes on Gaza's Kamal Adwan Hospital earlier this week killed numerous people and left a number of people dead, including those in the intensive care unit. This was just announced by the hospital director and reported in the Washington Post in the last day or two. CIA Director William Burns yesterday arrived in Doha to discuss the Gaza ceasefire talks. The language has been that they're positive and making progress. The Israeli military yesterday said it removed a small far-right group of Israeli citizens who had crossed into Lebanon because they were starting to build a settlement. They put up tents there. Related to Syria, just in the last day, there is no talk of a ceasefire deal between Ankara, that's Turkey, and the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. Those are the Kurdish-backed forces in the north. The presence of thousands of self-styled Islamic State fighters and their families in Syria's makeshift prisons is a ticking time bomb amid Turkey's SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces clashes, said a senior US official. I'm going to talk more about Syria broadly in a minute, but these are just from the last day. Revenge attacks are complicating Syria's security situation. This is important to understand. Reporters have seen evidence of extrajudicial killings and executions of alleged state security force members in the last days in Syria. Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel has instructed the country's military to remain on Mount Hermon on the Syrian side until at least the end of 2025, through the end of next year. He also said this week that he wants to double the population in the Golan Heights, which is considered occupied territory by most of the world. You'll recall during Trump's former presidency in the US, he acknowledged the annexation of the Golan. The U.S. has given Syrian rebels a list of former officials who might know something about Austin Tice, who's the American journalist who was abducted in Damascus in 2012, well over a decade ago. Russian President Putin today said that he's going to ask the former Syrian President al-Assad about the missing journalist Tice to see if he can get news. Israel earlier today launched strikes on Houthi targets in Yemen, killing 9 people and injuring 3 others. Today, also, the State Department, Secretary of State Blinken announced that the U.S. is sanctioning Iran's oil trade and support for proxies and partners because of violations of human rights. They said that there are 4 entities specifically that have been transporting Iranian oil. Blinken said as long as Iran devotes its energy and revenues to funding attacks on U.S. allies and partners, supporting terrorism around the world, and pursuing destabilizing actions, we will continue to use the tools at our disposal to hold the regime accountable. So that's all from like the last day or so. In Syria, all eyes are on the new regime. The new regime is HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams. Al-Sham, their leader is Ahmad al-Shara. Ahmad al-Shara is his birth name. The Guardian did a great analysis talking about his nam de guerre, his name of war, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. Abu Muhammad al-Jalani and Ahmad al-Shara are the same person. One is his nam de guerre, one is his birth name. He's a former jihadist. Now he's being called in the news al-Shara or Ahmad al-Shara, his birth name. Here's some things to know. His name of war, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. He fought U.S. soldiers in Iraq alongside jihadi insurgents from 2003 to 2006. He was incarcerated there for 5 years in detention camps in Iraq. He returned to Syria in 2011 to play important roles in the campaigns of both the Islamic State and al-Qaeda. Jalani took over the Islamic group Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, HTS, from 2017. He imposed his rule on 2 million people in the northwestern Syrian enclave of Idlib. So HTS has had control over Idlib from 2017. Is my understanding. The last month, it was Jalani who launched this rebel coalition that was dominated by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And there was a 12-day campaign that ultimately resulted in Damascus being overturned and al-Assad being ousted. So the Assad regime was overthrown. The question everyone's asking is Jalani now being, who's now being called Ahmad al-Shara, is al-Shara, what kind of a leader is he going to be? Like, who is he? He's been designated a terrorist by the US, by UK. There's a $10 million price on his head. Who is he going to be? Is he going to be Jalani? Is he going to be Shara? What's this going to look like? We know US officials have already been in contact with him. We know that there have been direct contact between the US and HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. We know that he has said, al-Shara said this week, that Syrian rebel factions are going to be disbanded. So this whole group of rebel forces, they're being disbanded, and fighters will be trained to join the ranks of the defense ministry. Al-Shara also urged the US and other nations to lift the sanctions on Syria to allow the country to be able to rebuild. It's expected that at least 1 million refugees will return to Syria within the first 6 months of the next year. We also know that all eyes are on the areas in the north of Syria. The Turkish-backed forces and the Kurdish-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. This week, the UN Special Envoy for Syria warned that the conflict has not ended, that Assad is ousted, but you have these clashes that have still been happening in the past week between Turkish-backed forces and Kurdish-backed forces, the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces. They're Kurdish-led coalition, SDF. They're left-wing ethnic militias. They serve as the official military wing of the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, or AANES. They're unofficially known as Rojava. We know that Turkey and allied militias were building forces along the Syrian border. There were concerns about a potential incursion this past week into SDF-held territories. That has not happened as of yet. U.S. airstrikes also struck self-styled Islamic State camps in areas that were formerly controlled by Assad this week. We know that there were 12 IS operatives that were killed, according to CENTCOM. There was a mass grave that was found outside of Damascus this week where 100,000 bodies were found, having been killed by the Assad regime. We have a staff member who has family in Syria. There have been reports of Turkish-backed fighters who were targeting Greek Orthodox archdiocese in Hama in Syria. There were images shown of destroyed statues and other desecrations and vandalization at churches. Over this past week, we know Israel also continued to strike Syria over the weekend and early into the week. There were 75 strikes on Saturday targeting weapons depots and air defenses. Hezbollah lost its supply routes through Syria, its group reported early last week as well. Other updates from this past week from Gaza. Hamas provided Israel with the names of living hostages. We don't have a number, but we know that those names were provided. This was through Egypt, through Egyptian intermediaries. A group official told the Washington Post, the proposal is not even a permanent ceasefire. It's a 60-day ceasefire. It would involve the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. Hamas has backed down on so many of its demands. It's no longer demanding a permanent ceasefire. It's no longer demanding a full withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza. A major point of contention does have to do with Hamas's insistence on allowing displaced Palestinians to return to North Gaza, to their homes. Now, what I have heard from on the ground is that there is an expectation that some of Gaza will be annexed, that there has to be a punishment of land because of the Hamas attacks on October 7th. There's a 3-part break. There's a Netzarim corridor break. There's now going to be a break north of Gaza City, that it could be just that. I don't mean just that. Any annexation is horrific. But there is now a battle about whether or not Palestinians will be allowed to return to North Gaza. Hamas has displayed greater flexibility regarding the Philadelphia corridor and the Netzarim corridor. Philadelphia has a major battle also with Egypt. There have been dozens of people killed every single day. The most significant news is the death toll continues to climb. The death toll in Gaza is now more than 45,000 people killed. And complicit countries like the United States are passing legislation, which literally just passed this week. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, banning the U.S. military from using the numbers of the health ministry in Gaza, in official reports. So, we have the military-industrial complex. We have the U.S. military not being able to quote numbers. The only numbers that are coming out of Gaza, because reporters are not allowed in Gaza, are not allowed to be reported by the U.S. military. Sunday night, Israeli strikes in Gaza killed 53 Palestinians, including journalists and rescue workers. An airstrike hit the civil emergency center in the Nusrat market, killing Ahmad Alou, who was a video journalist for Al Jazeera TV, five other people, medics and journalists. Another strike on a house killed 5 people, including children. On Friday last week, Israeli strike at a post office killed at least 33 people and wounded 50. The death toll that day rose to 66. UNRWA said in the past 4 months alone, nearly 19,000 children have been hospitalized because of acute malnutrition. Just remember, the death tolls that we get from Gaza of more than 45,000 people are direct deaths. So if people die because of indirect causes, they are not included in that death toll number. Blinken returned late last week from maybe his 12th trip to the Middle East. I don't have much to say about that. Israel is fighting back against the international community's pressures, including the ICC arrest warrants against Gallant and Netanyahu. There's also one against Mohammed Diaf, who Israel says is dead, but there has not been proof of death. Israel filed an appeal against the arrest warrants with the ICC. Sunday, Israel announced that it will close its embassy in Ireland because Ireland has joined South Africa's genocide case at the ICJ. Late last week and over the weekend, Israel's news reported that they are creating a registration process, a new one for foreign NGOs, particularly ones that aid Palestinian Arabs. They said it's a part of their struggle against anti-Semitism, and it's headed by their Ministry for Diaspora Affairs and their head of anti-Semitism in an interministerial team. American prisoner Travis Timmerman was among the thousands released this week from Syrian prisons. He was 29 years old. He said he was there on a Christian pilgrimage. He said he was not ill-treated. His prison was operated by Syrian intelligence. He was freed by liberators who came to the prison and knocked down the doors with a hammer. A group of Palestinians and their relatives fired a lawsuit this week at the U.S. State Department, accusing the State Department of creating loopholes for Israel based on a 1997 prohibiting the U.S. from providing military support where there's credible evidence of gross human rights abuses. The news I wanted to talk about in terms of legislation was what was included in the defense bill that passed 2 days ago, I think, or yesterday. It was passed in the Senate, formerly in the House. It included a death toll provision, and this is what I was mentioning, that prevents the Pentagon from publicly citing any authoritative casualty data from the Gaza Health Ministry, which can, according to the report, this was The Intercept said it effectively conceals the full extent of the death toll in Gaza in all military public communications. The data from the Palestinian authorities is the only consistent and reliable count of the death toll in the last 14 months. And Israel consistently denies human rights workers access to the enclave and prevents foreign media journalists from entering. I also wanted to let you know something that happened at the Vatican this past week. Many were deeply moved when the Vatican nativity scenes, one was gifted by a Palestinian artist. It received a final edition in moments just before His Holiness Pope Francis arrived on December 7th, a keffiyeh, a black and white checkered scarf that has come to mean the Palestinian cause. It's been historically used by Bedouins and shepherds. It was placed in the manger beneath the baby Jesus. And this caught world attention, of course, but sitting in his wheelchair, Pope Francis was led to the nativity scene and he prayed in silence. And then he made this impassioned speech. This is from Vatican News, or this was from Religious News Service. He made this impassioned speech for peace in the Middle East. It says, with tears in his eyes, let us raise our prayer for peace. This is His Holiness Pope Francis's words. With tears in our eyes, let us raise our prayer for peace. Brothers and sisters, enough war, enough violence, the Pope said while looking at the nativity scene. The appearance of the keffiyeh on the nativity scene caused quite a stir, and it was widely reported by major news outlets. Several Jewish organizations expressed concern over its presence at the Vatican. We're disappointed and troubled that a meaningful religious tradition has been politicized in this way. And the American Jewish Committee, in a post on X, and the Jewish Italian media outlet Maked, expressed shock and uneasiness upon seeing the Pope before this Palestinian-made nativity. Several days later, on Wednesday, Pope Francis celebrated his weekly general audience at Paul VI Hall. The manger and the keffiyeh were gone. Gone. Now, the Vatican stated in response to broad speculation over the keffiyeh's disappearance that it is tradition for baby Jesus to be removed from the nativity until the night before Christmas. While true, the explanation does not entirely answer the question of why the manger and the keffiyeh were removed. So that's all from Religious News Services. That's all I know, but I think it's an important story to be told. Do please join us tomorrow, Friday, for the Christ at the Rebel service with Reverend Dr. Mother Itzhak. That service went viral last year. It was quite profound. He'll be preaching from Bethlehem. Many of us, Churches for Middle East Peace, among others, are co-sponsoring it. If you missed our prayer vigil for Advent Not Arms, if you haven't signed our petition in the US, or if you're in the UK, sign the petition with Embrace the Middle East. Join Advent Not Arms, call for the withholding of weapons so that the atrocities in Gaza will be brought to an end. US weapons are being used to kill dozens of people every day, still every day. Watch that Advent Not Arms vigil on YouTube, bishops from around the world. It was really, really beautiful, calling for the withholding of weapons. Use these events, write about them in your local newspapers, talk about them in your churches, lead prayer meetings, call for peace and not war, Advent and not arms this Advent season. May God go before us as we hold on to Advent hope and wait for Christ to come. In His name, amen.